Diane Keaton. You won't believe how quiet the world got the day she left. One breath, one morning in California, and a voice that had taught millions how to feel simply stopped. Diane Keaton. She arrived in the movies like someone who'd borrowed the costume of honesty and never gave it back. From a girl who learned to hide feelings at the dinner table to the woman who made vulnerability look like the bravest thing a person could wear, her life read like a film, sometimes comic, often heartbreaking, always utterly human. She wasn't a star who burned bright and then faded. She was someone who burned steady, whose light warmed people for decades. Think about that awkward laugh, the turtlenecks, the hats that became a kind of armor and invitation at once. That was her, equal parts defense and dare. She taught us it was okay to look messy, to love weirdly, to keep trying when everything around you screamed give up. She turned imperfection into a manifesto and made tenderness feel like a superpower. She didn't arrive on easy roads. New York in the late 60 seconds was a test, not a playground, cold rooms, unpaid bills, auditions that ended with not the type. Imagine carrying your whole life in one suitcase, walking those streets, sleep stolen by fear and dreams stitched together by necessity. She told stories about singing in smoky basements and sleeping in her coat. Those weren't glamorous anecdotes. They were survival notes. She built herself out of fear and kept going. And that grit was what made her acting so true, because truth is forged when there's nowhere left to hide. Her breakout was quiet and seismic at once. A role that made people stop and say, "That's new, raw, unpolished, real." Then came the movies that made her name permanent in our cultural DNA. She showed us how to laugh through the pain, how to hold wit and sorrow in the same palm. When she won the Oscar, she held that gold like a private answer to a loud world. Yes, I exist. I was seen. But the applause didn't fix the hollowness that sometimes lives inside success. She learned, as many of us do, that being seen doesn't always mean being known. Her love life read like a quiet epic. With Al Pacino, there wasn't the thunder of tabloid romance so much as a slow, deep recognition. Two people who fit into the same lonely space and kept each other company for a while. It wasn't fireworks. It was mirror work, reflection that sometimes healed and sometimes hurt. Love didn't cure her, but it taught her about what she could be without another person's echo. Sometimes the most defining relationships are the ones that don't end in always, but in lessons. Loss arrived early and often. Family health crises, private griefs, and the slow, grinding loneliness fame often brings. She learned to translate those silences into work, into performances that felt like confessions rather than acting. That's why her best scenes feel like someone passed you a truth and asked you to hold it gently. She didn't perform heartbreak. She gave it language. And then there was the later life people forget to celebrate enough. The rebuilding. When the industry's spotlight moved on, she became an architect of things that last. She rescued houses, restored old bones of buildings, and turned them into sanctuaries. That was literal and symbolic. She fixed what was falling apart, and in fixing it, she made room for herself. She adopted children and made a home that, for once, answered back with laughter. She discovered that family could be chosen, made by hand, and tended like a garden. Those years showed a woman who had learned how to be whole on her own terms. She also gave back in quiet ways, supporting preservation, championing artists, and directing resources toward causes she felt mattered. Money, she said, never made anyone safe, but attention, care, and stubborn effort could rebuild a life. That was her currency. Restoration over glamour. Substance over spectacle. Her last days, gentle, private, as she would have wanted, came like the rest of her life. with a quiet integrity. A teacup left warm, a journal open, the light that had always loved her face, finding her one final time. It was peaceful, intimate, exactly the kind of ending that felt true to a woman who preferred the inside of a life to its press photos. What remains now isn't a resume of credits or a list of awards. It's the mirror she handed to generations of women and asked them to really look without editing. It's the permission slip she offered anyone who'd ever felt awkward or too loud or too quiet to be fully themselves. She made it okay to be complicated. She showed that resilience could be elegant and that solitude could be a kind of deep, deliberate love. If you learned anything from her, if a line from a movie saved a small corner of your heart, if a smile she gave in a scene made you feel less alone, then this is her gift, still working. She made loneliness feel less like failure and more like a room you could fill with books, plants, and stubborn hope. So, here's the last thing to say. Press like, not for numbers, but for gratitude. Drop a short R.I.P. Diane Keaton below as a tiny flame that says, "Thank you." Tell someone you love to watch one of her films, and notice how she taught people to be kinder to themselves. Share a moment you stole from her, an outfit, a laugh, a line, and let it live. She taught us that the bravest act can be staying, that loving, even when it hurts, is always worth the risk. She kept trying until the end, and that, more than anything, is the lesson she leaves us. If her life moved you, click like and subscribe to keep sharing stories that remind us how to be human. And when you next see someone wearing a hat indoors or laughing at the wrong time, remember her smile a little wider. She would have liked that. Note, Diane Keaton's passing was widely reported on the 11th of October 2025. If you learned anything from her, if a line from a movie saved a small corner of your heart, if a smile she gave in a scene made you feel less alone, then this is her gift still working. She made loneliness feel less like failure and more like a room you could fill with books, plants, and stubborn hope. So here's the last thing to say. Press like not for numbers, but for gratitude. Drop a short "Rip Diane Keaton" below as a tiny flame that says, "Thank you." Tell someone you love to watch one of her films and notice how she taught people to be kinder to themselves. Share a moment you stole from her, an outfit, a laugh, a line, and let it live.